Hello, my friend, and welcome to Secure and Insecure, hosted by me, Johnny Seifert. This is the Celebrity Mental Health Podcast where I say it's okay to not be okay. And if you have the same mantra as me, whether you're watching on YouTube or wherever you're listening, click that 5-star rating, click the subscribe button, and let's keep spreading the word in 2024 that it's okay to not be okay. Now, let me tell you about my guest today. My guest today is part of the Secure and Insecure book club, and this is where I talk to authors about the mental health themes behind their books. And this week, it's the Queen of March books. Every March, she brings out an absolute banger of a book. The Guilty Couple last year was one of my favourite books of all year, purely because I literally, all the way to the end, could not work out who did what and who did when. And it was just so exciting. So when I found out her new book, which is this, it's Every Move You Make is out to buy now. And I'm a bit sorry that before we get into the interview, it's a bit battered because I've taken it over because I couldn't put it down. So I had a bath, I went to a jacuzzi, I had a shower. It came with me. So this is an amazing book. Every Move You Make is out to go and buy now with CL Taylor. So without further ado, welcome CL or Callie to the show.
Thank you for having me on.
Are we calling you Callie or CL today?
Callie, I reckon.
Oh, she's got... I feel privileged. Why Callie versus CL Taylor? What made you go, I don't want to put my actual name there. I want to have an abbreviation of it.
Because I did actually use my real name when I started writing. I had 2 romantic comedies published first, and they were Callie Taylor. And when I switched to crime, my publisher said, we don't want people to get confused and think these are going to be like your romantic comedies. I mean, they couldn't be more different. So we tossed around a few different names. At first we thought maybe we'll call me Cal Taylor, C-A-L, which is more sort of, you know, you don't know if I'm male or female. I think because S.J. Watson had a massive hit with Before I Go to Sleep, they thought, oh, initials, maybe initials are a thing. So I became C.L. Taylor. And now loads of people use their initials. It's not that unusual anymore.
You've got B.A. Paris, you've got C.J. Tudor. But what does it do to your identity, though? Because, you know, as a radio presenter, I've always thought, oh, well, I want my name out there. You know, this is what I've been working for forever. And when you do a type of book and a genre of book, and your audience follows you, they're buying into you and they're buying into your writing because they know what to expect. So yes, it's romantic, and yes, you're now going in the more crime psychological thriller way, but do you not feel that my identity is being Callie Lewis? And it doesn't matter what book I write, my audience is still going to follow through with that. It's not like you've got a different audience for the 2 genres of books.
Readers that bought the romantic comedies also bought the crime, because I think a reader falls in love with the voice of an author, the way you tell a story. So a lot of them did follow along. In terms of my identity, I think you become whatever name you put on the front of your book. And it does make things like podcasts and radio interviews a bit awkward because, you introduce C.L. Taylor and then you're referred to by your first name, Callie, and then people will be Googling Callie Taylor and not finding the C.L. Taylor. That kind of thing is problematic. But in terms of identity, I just feel like, those are my initials. I am C.L. Taylor, so it's still me.
But then it's almost like a brand within itself. So the CL Taylor brand is almost the public figure. And then you've got Callie Taylor, who's at home, who's just the mum and everything like that. So do you notice that difference of when you're switching on as CL Taylor, maybe the way you write, that you're writing almost with that pseudonym in your head, and versus that Callie who's just at home?
I mean, I know that at events, but if I do an event and I'm doing a CL Taylor event, if there are people who know me from my real life, I feel a bit weird because I think when you do an event, you are your author self. And the people who are watching you that know you as you see a slightly different side of you, maybe a slightly more polished side of you, a slightly more assertive, confident side of you. But I think that's true of most authors. But when I write, obviously I'm aware that C.L. Taylor has a certain brand and readers expect, a certain kind of book from me. But there is so much of me in those books. There might be some things where I'm a bit like, oh no, I can't really do that because that's not very C.L. Taylor. But then I still try and push things. So in the book I'm writing at the moment, for example, there's more humour. Whether that works or not for a C.L. Taylor book, I don't know until my editor takes a look at it. But there is humour in me, and I feel like it does creep out in some of the books. Some of the side characters are often a little bit humorous because it can be quite intense just writing dark, tense, gripping stuff. I think you need those moments of lightness, and that's there are both sides of my personality there, the darkness and the light.
So what does that do to the imposter syndrome? I saw on your Instagram, which I absolutely love, your writing tips, which I followed for a while. And one of your writing tips was, I'm 25% into the book now that I've been writing. And now I'm at that stage where I'm like, oh, I don't know if this is going to be as good as my last book. And when you're now thinking about, oh, do you know what? I need to add some more humor in and make it a bit more universal and a bit more rounded. When you are being that C.L. Taylor versus being the Callie. So the C.L. Taylor, if we're going to use these analogies, C.L. Taylor, the one that goes out there to the events, who has the books, and the Callie who's just sitting behind that laptop, just writing away. What does that imposter syndrome do to the Callie who's writing before it's been seen by anyone, before the editor goes, this is a C.L. Taylor, but this is just me, Callie, on a normal Tuesday night writing?
Yeah, imposter syndrome doesn't go away. When I wrote my first book, which was published in 2009, I was full of imposter syndrome, and now I'm writing book 15 in 2024. It's still there. I always think that if you don't have imposter syndrome, and if you're too confident, if you're too sure, then there's probably an issue. I think it's that imposter syndrome that makes you work that bit harder, that makes you want to be better. I mean, of course, sometimes it can be crippling. I mean, it hasn't yet been crippling for me, although I did have burnout last year, but that's slightly different. Imposter syndrome just makes me want to make the book as good as I can possibly make it. And yes, I might compare myself to other authors and think, I haven't got as many fans as them, or I'm not getting as great reviews as them, or I'm not doing, worldwide tours, whatever that is. But that's more sort of comparisonitis, I think, than imposter syndrome. It's just something that you just live with, that becomes part of the job, I think.
Well, I think also when you work in the media as well and you're pitted against people and everyone's basing on certain parameters, whether it's a Sunday Times chart, whether it's, you're right, the followers on Instagram or TikTok, that pressure's on, which in any other job you wouldn't get. You're just being told, look, this is your job, here's your review, how have you done this year personally, rather than being compared to everyone. Let's talk about that burnout, because you're not the first author of the Secure and Insecure Book Club who's spoken about burnout in the past year. So there obviously is a theme post-COVID that we all came out of COVID. You were all then writing more books and, inspired by the way the world was going. And it's just very interesting. There's this trend that I'm noticing now that a lot of authors burnt out in 2022. What happened to you? What's your story?
Yeah, for me, so I've always written a book a year, pretty much. And occasionally I've written 2 books a year, because I wrote some young adult thrillers as well. And writing 2 books a year is hard. But what happened was in 2020, I was writing Her Last Holiday, which I can't remember what book that was, but it came out in 2021. I was also editing The Island, which was one of my young adult thrillers. And then my publicist got furloughed. So I was writing one book, I was editing another book, and then I had a book come out, Strangers. My editor was furloughed, my publicist was furloughed. So then I had to take on all the publicity as well. I was trying to get the book out there because all of the normal sort of means of doing that had now gone, along with my publicist. So I was doing Facebook lives, and I was running competitions for my readers, and I was trying to entertain them, and and spread the word and all this sort of thing. And it was just too much. I mean, at the time I kind of worked on adrenaline. And it's so weird because my office here is overlooking my garden. I live on a row of terraced houses, and I can see all the terraces opposite as well. And a lot of those people were furloughed, and they were in their gardens with their kids and all that sort of thing. And I was just sitting here doing what felt like multiple jobs, like I'd never been so busy. And then by the time I got to 2021, it came time to write another book. And because Strangers didn't do particularly well, because most of the supermarkets were shut and that sort of thing, I felt a huge pressure to write something that was going to lift my sales back up again, that was going to, reinvigorate everything. And so I started working on a book, and it didn't work. And I kept pushing it. I kept pushing the idea. I kept plotting it and replotting it, doing research, reading all this kind of stuff, talking to people. And the harder that I worked on the book, the more convoluted it got, and the more in my gut I felt like this just isn't working. And I pushed and pushed for like 2.5 months to try and make this idea work. And I sent it to my editor, and she just said, no, it doesn't work. And I just thought, oh my God, what a massive waste of time. And I had all this anxiety building up on me because, you know, in your contract, you have a yearly deadline. If you're writing a book a year, you have to deliver it by the same time every year. And I'd already wasted 2.5 months on an idea that didn't work. So I just took some time off. I said to my agent, what am I going to do? And she said, take some time off, step away from social media, do something that makes you relaxed. And for me, that's painting, creating, crafting, that sort of thing. So I joined like an online portrait painting course, and I did a lot of that. And it was almost like it was what I needed to sort of reset myself and do something creative for creative's sake, rather than to earn a living, to sell a lot of books, to hit the Sunday Times bestsellers charts. I was just making for fun. And I think that helped reset me. And then gradually an idea crept into my head, and that was The Guilty Couple. So it was like I almost needed to have that space just to play for an idea to come, instead of forcing the idea, which just made things 100 times worse.
Which is really interesting because in the generation that we're in now, the Callie who went and did the painting and had that break, it was amazing for your mental health personally. Also, it meant for your career and the books and whatnot. However, there's that element of, well, hold on, the CL Taylor who's taking 2 months off, that's 60 days of no social media. That's, I don't know, 600 posts of social media that she wasn't able to do. And suddenly you're like, well, okay, I'm going to step away from Instagram. I'm going to step away from TikTok. I'm going to have a social media detox. And then you're like, well, hold on, I need to be posting every day because if I'm not on Book Talk, no one's going to know about me. Da, 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 da. And you have this big argument in your head. What was that moment you got to that point of going, do you know what? Social media isn't everything. The sales aren't everything. Yes, I've got 13 books behind me. Yes, I'm successful. Yes, I've got money. Yes, I've got these contracts. Yes, people do want me. But my mental health is more important than what is now actually just work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it just becomes so ingrained in you that you must do social media, you must do social media. But if you look at people like Maggie O'Farrell, for example, or Mick Herron, they don't have a social media presence at all. I mean, obviously, their publishers both do great things in terms of marketing their books. And, you know, Mick Herron's Apple TV series massively helps advertise his books as well. But they don't do it. And I'm so envious of that. But I think that is very rare. I think most authors have to be on social media. Most authors have to kind of remind readers, because there's so many of us, there's so many authors, so many books coming out every year. You know, and despite the fact that I might update my Facebook, my Instagram, my Twitter, and send out a newsletter, I'll often get people saying, oh my God, you had an event in, you know, Cardiff. I didn't know. And I'm like, I felt like I was shouting about it for weeks, but they still miss it. So you feel like you need to do that. And it's not just about shouting about your brand or your book either. It's about building relationships with those readers. Because, you know, if you post something and your readers take the time to respond, the worst thing you can do is just ignore them, you know. And because that foisters that sense of the readers are giving to you and you're not giving back. And I see it with some authors who will post things and then just ignore the responses they get. I personally find that really rude. So I always make the time to respond to all of those people. But that makes more work for yourself in a way. So if you are posting once a day, then you're also responding to comments once a day. So when you stop that, you just there is a peace to that feeling that if you don't post, you don't respond, and you have more time and you have more headspace, because you on social media you do end up with so many people's voices in your heads, you know. And it's not just readers, it's, you know, if you're on Twitter, you've got other authors, or you've got publishing people, or you've got whoever you follow, and all those voices are in your head. And I don't think that that is helpful for mental health. And I don't think it's particularly helpful for creativity. I think creativity works best when you're in a quiet place. I mean, most of my ideas for solving plot points come just as I'm about to fall asleep. I get the answers to plot issues that I've been having because it's that moment when the mind is quiet and the outside world is quiet and there's no input from anywhere, that the subconscious does the work and brings the answer to you.
It's very interesting as well that when we think about the relationship between the author and social media and the community, it's very, very different to podcasters, to TV stars, to musicians, where you build up a national household following. This is very much of a niche, and I'm very fortunate that I have publicists like your brilliant publicist Becky, who know the types of books that I like and will recommend me based on what my passions are. But to find a new author is really hard, and I really struggle. The first time I read someone's book, I find it really hard if it's a new author that I don't know, because I don't know their way of speaking. And there's people like Tim Weaver, for example, who does the David Raker series, who has the same 4 characters every single year. And so for me, that's like going to old friends. There's people like Amanda Prowse, who's a really dear friend of mine, who I just know that beginning, middle, and end and how that's systematically going to go. There's a book I was reading, Janice Hatlett's book, which is based on the fairway players of an amateur dramatics group. And her way of writing a book is by doing it via text messages and emails and I don't know, WhatsApps. And so for me, that's a completely different way of reading. And so it's really hard to get there. And so you're right. When you get to that point where you go, well, hold on a minute, that audience member has bought my book. And also, they're spending a lot of time with me. You know, I can read a book on holiday in a day. But when I've got normal life going on, it might take me a week or 2 weeks to read a book. That's a long time to invest in someone every day for half an hour. And so you're right, building up that community and taking it for granted is 2 things. And I think, you know, if we think about someone like a Harlan Coben, who's obviously got his amazing TV shows, he doesn't need to necessarily do that. But there's definitely a pressure that you put on yourself because your followings are never going to be on Instagram in the, I don't know, 500,000, a million. You know, you're not going to be content creators and influencers. You're there to do a job, and that job is part of it is the promotion on Instagram. So how do you balance those numbers and that interaction going, well, okay, I can comment and reply back once a day. I don't need to have endless amounts of followers. I'm not this Love Island star who's looking for brand deals.
Yeah, it's interesting because you do see those big numbers if someone goes massive. Like I was looking at Colleen Hoover's Instagram the other day. I think she's got something like 1.5 million, 2 million. That's when you can't respond to all the messages anymore, obviously. But it doesn't matter as much because that in that case you're know that you are huge, you are a global superstar, and there's no way you can respond to 1,000 comments or whatever. I don't necessarily feel that I need to have big numbers for Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or whatever. What is important is to build that core readership, those readers who will say to me, I have read every single one of your books, or I've made a note in my diary when your next book comes out so I can take the day off and read it. Fair weather readers come and go. And I think often when publishers do special deals, 99p, whatever, you'll get a lot of fair weather readers just grabbing 99p deals here, there, and everywhere. But they won't necessarily become one of your fans. They'll just go on to the next 99p book. So building up that proper loyal readership is more important than just some massive number of people who also follow hundreds of other people just to get tidbits every day, and that's it.
But also, they probably don't know what book they're reading, but they're at the airport, they like the front cover, they're like, okay, I'll take that for the holiday, and then bin it, and they've bought 4 of those for, you're right, 99p, it's 4.99, so what? Let's talk about your book, Every Move You Make. I'm sorry that it looks like I don't know what your book is called. It's only because I've got Watch Your Back on the front of my book, and so I keep going, Watch Your Back. It's not called Watch Your Back, and it's not called because I'm watching you, it's called Every Move You Make, so I've got to keep going.
Yeah, I've had this conversation with my publisher, like, just put the title on the front, but there you go.
It's an amazing book. It's an amazing book for people who join a WhatsApp group, all based around stalking. The first question I've really got for you is why WhatsApp? This is the first time I've thought about a group of people who have something in common, who have met on a forum or online. actually taking it to WhatsApp to that very personal level. So why did you want to use that as a strand for your book?
I think it's just it's what we all use, isn't it? Well, certainly my generation. My son is 12 and he's on Snapchat, but I think it creates that sense of intimacy when you have a WhatsApp group, whether it's, you know, for a night out or, you know, it's your book club group or whatever it is. It has that kind of sense of intimacy. And because these 5 people all met on an internet forum where, you know, there's hundreds of, well, maybe not hundreds of thousands, but thousands of people who are all being stalked, who are all looking for support. To make that much smaller, I had that 5 who all happened to live in London form a WhatsApp group. So there's less noise, there's no other voices, it's just the 5 of them. And I think it creates that sense of intimacy, but also that sense of intensity, because all they're ever talking about in that WhatsApp group is their stalkers and how to survive and how to be safe. And I think for the reader, that gives them an insight into the kind of conversations that they're having. And then obviously I examine each of the individual characters separately as well.
And what I like about it is that you've got 4 girls and you've got 1 guy, and the importance of representing also that males can be stalked as well. It's not just a crime against females, same as when we talk about rape. It's not just stereotypically raping females, there's also men that can be raped as well. How conscious were you of keeping that balance to make sure that it was gender neutral?
Mm. No, I thought that was really important. There definitely had to be a man who was the victim of stalking, to keep it balanced. And I also wanted to spread it across different situations as well. So River, that's the man in the book. It's his ex-girlfriend who's stalking him and his current partner, Meg. There's also Lucy, who's being stalked by her ex-partner, but she's much younger. And then there's Alexandra, the actress, who is being stalked by she doesn't know who, which is quite scary in itself. And then there's Bridget, who's stalked by an ex-colleague. And I thought, in order to make the book interesting but also representative, I had to put different kinds of stalking situations. I mean, the majority of stalking situations in real life are ex-partners, so that's why there's 2 of those. But I wanted to look at other angles as well.
You've got a psychology degree, which
Yeah.
means that hopefully you can be a bit of a psychologist. What's the psychology around stalking? Because you mentioned it a lot of the time it is ex-partners. Why specifically is it ex-partners who are doing the stalking, and what do you think that says about the world that we live in?
I think it's all to do with loss of control. Um, because when someone, you know, in the majority of the cases, the partner who becomes the victim is often the one who's left the relationship for whatever reason. You know, either they've met someone else or they've had enough or they're scared. And it's that loss of control that drives the stalker to try and regain it. And I mean, if you read the author note at the back of every move you make, you'll have read that I was stalked myself 15 years ago by an ex-partner. And talking about that situation, I was in a very coercive and controlling relationship for 4 years. And I tried to leave him multiple times. And every time he managed to talk me back, he preyed on my insecurities, and he just knew what to say. He knew me better than anybody had ever known me, because there was almost a kind of forensic focus on me as a person and everything that made me tick. And that was at the time when I fell in love with him, I saw that as hugely flattering. But as time went on, I began to see how insidious that actually was. And then when I decided to leave him forever, I knew that if I so much as responded to a single text message or a single phone call, he'd start to talk me round. He'd start to push at those buttons that had worked before, and he'd talk me back round. So I was like, right, that's it. Nothing, no contact. If I don't respond, he can't talk me around. And that, I think, hugely frustrated him, because he was so used to being in control of every element of our relationship. And that's why he absolutely bombarded me, why he would travel down from London to Brighton, where I lived at the time, and stand outside my door and continually ring the bell. And I could feel that sense of frustration building, in that he was looking for me everywhere. He was looking for me over the internet. You know, even after a few months had passed and I was on a dating site and I'd put up a dating profile, he found that dating profile, which would not have been easy due to the algorithms involved in that particular website, and he matched what I'd written, but wrote it in a male way. And then he liked my profile to let me know that he'd seen it, you know, and knew that I'd look and see what he'd written. It was almost like, I am your perfect partner. So I think it was just that drive, that how dare she not respond? I'm the one in control here. And luckily in my situation, it ended when I got my dad involved and we said that we'd report him to the police. In my case, that was enough for him to stop. But in many cases, that makes absolutely no difference. It becomes an obsession, the absolute focus of everything.
And obviously what then happens as well is that you can go to the police, but there's no evidence. And so, yes, you can write a list and keep a diary and say, yes, well, this happened at this point, this one. Well, how do you prove it? You can't prove it. He's standing there. Well, I can't see him standing there. You know, I can drive by your house each day as a police officer, but he's not there. So I can't prove anything. It took you 15 years to write this book, or 14 years to write this book after that experience. Why now? Why did you think now's the time to tell a story and use my own traumas for it?
I think anything that's particularly traumatic, I think it's very difficult to access because you're so triggered. So I think anywhere closer to, you know, I'd written it a couple of years after it had happened, I think I would have been too close to it to see it with a fictional eye. I sometimes see when people write their first books, they often write about something big in their life, something traumatic that's happened to them, but they're so close to the reality of what happened that they can't fictionalize it very well because they get too wrapped up in it. And I think for me, it wasn't something that I wanted to write, you know, very soon afterwards, because then you're really reliving it. I mean, you know, there were still moments in writing the book now, 15 years later, where, you know, it does trigger that racing heart and that dry mouth and those feelings that you had when it's happening to you. But it was actually the case of Sarah Everett last year. And there were a lot of cases in the news, or maybe I was just aware of them, or maybe they were just being reported more, but so many cases about stalking and women being killed. And I just felt like, I think this is quite an important time to tell this story, or tell my story through these fictional characters, in the hope that it will help people better understand. Because, you know, I think unless you've been stalked, you kind of see it as this kind of bogeyman kind of situation, and you know, the threat and stuff. But I think even if your partner doesn't openly threaten you when you're being stalked, and mine didn't, because he was too clever, because I think he knew that he'd be in big trouble if I had evidence that he threatened me. But even if it's just a harassment, a bombardment, the psychological toil that it takes on the victim is enormous. And I just thought it was a good time to explore that.
That's what I was going to ask you about, Sir Everard. What did that do to you when that was in the news every day? And we had the original story about her specifically, and everything that happened with Rain Cousins. And then the dialogue changed into women's safety on the streets. And we had the memorials around the country, and then we had all the newspapers and news stations saying, well, look, be safe on the streets. What did that do to you? Did it take you back to that time of going, this happened to me, and almost this might now happen again? Because It made everyone question themselves straight away, but you'd actually lived through it properly, and it wasn't based on power, it was based on your actual previous experiences.
The Sarah Everett case was different because it was, it was a stranger, essentially. On behalf of all women, we should be able to walk down the streets, but just go home and be safe. And I think that's actually a line that I use in the book when someone was, it's not a spoiler, it happens in the first chapter. One of the five gets murdered for her ex-boyfriend, by her ex-boyfriend, and one of them says she was just going home. And I think the Sarah Everett case, that was the kind of terminology that really hit me. You can't just go home, And there are other women were murdered last year who were just going to visit a friend, or just going home, or just going about their everyday life. And that kind of thing shouldn't happen, and it just continues to happen. And I think every now and then there's a big high profile case that gets everybody, really aware, but I don't know how that can stop.
Well, Callie, I can't thank you enough for coming on Security and Secure today. If you're affected by what you've heard about stalking, the SusieLampard.org website is there to help you. That's Susie, SUZYLAMPLUGH.org, and the National Stalking Helpline is 0808 802 0300. Do go and check them out if you're affected by anything you've heard in this interview. My absolute thanks to Callie. Her book, Every Move You Make, or Watch Your Back, or Because I'm Watching You, whichever version you want to go for, is out to buy now. There's also other books coming out that your brilliant publicist Becky is doing in March and April, including The Second Chance by Charlotte Butterfield and Profile K by Helen Field. So go and buy them as well. Always important that we help our authors as a community together. And thank you for being part of the Security and Secure Book Club. If you love the Security and Secure Book Club, you want to hear from other authors, Amanda Prowse, Jane Fallon, Adele Parks, Tim Weaver, loads of people, Helly Acton, I've all been on it in the past. Go and check them out in the library. If you enjoyed today's episode, click that subscribe button, leave a 5-star rating and review, and let's keep spreading the word it's okay to not be okay. On social media, at Johnny Seifert, at Security and Secure Podcast, on Instagram, at Johnny Seifert 92, on TikTok. Callie, where can people find you?
They can find me on Instagram, CL Taylor Author. I'm Callie Taylor on Twitter, and I'm Callie Taylor Author on Facebook.
See, and this is why you need to have just one name. That's on the tin. Thank you for listening or watching 2 Seconds. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.